Hi everyone, it's Brianna here. I just wanted to make my own testimony video so that I can reach out to the brethren so that everyone can get to know me um, and so I could be more than just somebody that types on the internet. Um, it's a quite a long story. I'm hoping maybe I'll get through this well enough. I tried to do this twice already, but each time I tried, it just seemed like it just wasn't coming out the way that I wanted to. So it's completely typed out, and I figured it'd be easy to just, read it. And instead of recording myself, I'll just read. I'm not much of a good speaker, so it's best that it's written. Um, Mostly my strength is in writing. So here we go. Uh, my father and his entire side of the family are Baptists. He married my mother almost immediately after he met her in Texas. He had 5 children. I was number 4. When I was 2, my mother's postpartum depression really got to her from my brothers and sisters. There's not much time in between us, and she just became more and more depressed with each kid that she had without much time of break in between. Um, she decided that she didn't want to be a mother anymore, and so she checked into a mental hospital, and my father gained custody of us, and we lived with his parents, which is our grandparents, for a while. They ended up divorcing. Uh, about 6 to 7 months later, he met a Catholic woman in Connecticut on the internet. Um, and Connecticut is where most people are predominantly Catholic, so um, the chances of that were high anyway. Uh, which just She flew down to Texas to meet him and his children, us. He decided to marry her with the justice of the peace, and she stayed with us. But then a couple months later, after receiving a call that her father was dying of cancer back in Connecticut, my father sold his house and all of our household possessions to move there. I must have been about 3 at this point. The third child of our family, which is my older brother, he was born with a horrible disease known as Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. It's you know, briefly, it's a disease that slowly cripples and painfully kills mostly males before they reach 20. Um, when we had moved to Connecticut, our father was still calling himself a Baptist, and he took us to a nearby Baptist church. My father read from perversions like the New King James and the New International Version, NIV. Um, well, there were a lot of things over time my brother was going through physically because of this disease that was bringing lots of doubts to my father about God and God's mercy. And then this over time caused him to start hating God. Of course, he was never saved to begin with, as you will soon hear. One day, my father got into a serious disagreement with the pastor of this church that we were going to. That, and to this day, I still don't know what any of that was about. But my father decided after that he wanted nothing to do with religion or air quote churches ever again. After that, as a child, I was told there I was told there was a God in heaven, and if you were good, if you never killed a person or never committed suicide, that you went there. Um, I mean, obviously, I was under the wrong impression, but all I just believed was that God was in heaven, above in the sky. I mean, I wasn't saved as a child, obviously, but this is the first moment in which I tried connecting to God. I have memories um, as a 5-year-old girl just kneeling by my bed on the floor every night while everyone was asleep, and I would just stare at my bedroom window, uh, and I just would be talking away to God. I don't remember half the things I told him. I just talked with my child's heart's content. I had a little Bible my father gave me when we were going to church, and there was one point in which I tried to read Genesis, but I just couldn't. There was no way my childlike brain could understand anything. Uh, and I mean, it was a perversion anyway, so even if I could understand it, it's perversion. Um, my siblings and I, we learned very quickly that our stepmother didn't love us. Um, Whenever our father would go to work, she was always assigning us gruesome household tasks. In these chores that we would do, it would be, touching strong chemical like stuff with our own bare skin. Um, very very hard labor as kids. And she would beat us often. I mean, whenever she found a reason to, it could be a very small reason, like accidentally spilling a drink, and it was especially directed towards me and my sisters. She would even hit my brother, who was disabled and incapable of defending himself. Um, she was just uh, an abusive woman. She would take enjoyment out of hurting you. As a matter of fact, she would hit you enough times that she would make you cry, and only then did she feel satisfied to stop hitting you. She also abused us verbally. Always had an awful mouth, always swearing and always calling us horrible names. And this really became all we knew. All I knew was abuse from my stepmother, and not really understanding what a love of a mother is or anything. In 2003, my oldest sister, who's the firstborn, she turned out to be she have schizophrenia, and she was put into a mental hospital at that time because she poisoned our food in order to kill our father, and in the repercussions of it, she ended up poisoning us as well. So our father called the police, and she was removed from our home and everything. She During that time that she was removed, she claimed that our father was sexually abusing her, and no one believed her. Least of all, my other sister or me, or I mean, my father didn't have a reputation as somebody to hurt a child, so it kind of went away. And then after that, over time, my brother's physical health, my only older brother, it got worse and worse. So my father's hatred of God just continued to grow and grow. He believed that God existed, but he didn't understand or know God, and he hated that. And he would say this verbatim, that he hated that God could inflict such an awful disease on an innocent child. And it wasn't that he rejected God; it's just that he hated God. Um, in 2004, I believe that God started to afflict my father with a lot of problems after his hatred just grew. My father ended up losing his job because he lifted something too heavy, and some of the discs in his spine moved from their place, so he couldn't operate machinery anymore or whatever, or move quickly. So that's pretty much what happened in that year. 2009 took a turn for the worse because the unfounded claims that my oldest sister said, they actually became a reality for me and my second sister. my second oldest. I This is kind of hard for me to talk about, and I'm kind of glad I'm not facing the camera because it's hard. It's hard to talk about it, but um, I just want to say before I continue that the reason why I'm telling this something so personal is because I know I'm not the uh, only woman or person for that matter, because I'm sure um, boys also are affected as well. But there are people out there who have been hurt, and um, I'm not selfish enough to think that my situation was worse than anyone else's. Um, so if there's anyone that's listening or will listen, um, there there is not darkness at the end of the tunnel. Um, things are always better in the Lord. And if my story here will bring anybody to the Lord, all the glory to God, even if it's one person. I think that my story will resonate with a couple people. So that means something to me. At least God will get glory out of that. I was 11 when my father started molesting me and my second oldest sister. A lot of it was him looking more than touching in the beginning, and a lot of the time it would make me so embarrassed, and I'd feel so filthy. Um, every time I'd feel that way, he would tell me I'm just being too modest, and that I should let him look because he had seen me naked since I was a baby. Um, uh, I could never take a shower alone because he always invaded that privacy. He always made sure to keep the barrier down between the privacy of a father and a daughter. I couldn't be alone in a bathroom by myself. I couldn't be alone in my room by myself. Always making sure to get in the middle of it, and just always make me feel like this is a norm. Um, I wasn't allowed to lock any doors because he would always claim there might be a fire and I can't get out if I'm locking doors. So of course all of this was hidden from my stepmother, and it wasn't just me. It was my other sister too. Um, but I didn't know this. All I knew was that it was happening to me, and I had a suspicion it was happening to her, but her and I never spoke to each other about it. Um, a lot of what was happening, I used to lock it away. So instead of talking about it, I had no one to tell. And I was scared to even mention it because if I talked about it, then it makes it more true, if that makes sense. Well, um, 2008, um, I was getting a lot of intense stress because of the abuse, and it caused me to have shingles. It was across my chest. It was a nightmare. My father was the only one that would go near me, and it was impossible to wear a shirt because the intense needle-like fire pain on my chest would be just unbearable. I had to stay home for about a month and a half until it just healed on its own, and it was the worst time I ever went through. Um, at this point in my life, I had eventually forgotten God growing up, and I didn't speak at all to the God in heaven as before. Um, that connection I had once attempted to form as a child, just I guess just disappeared. If we fast forward, when I was 15, it was in 2009. I was a freshman in high school, and I met an entire new world compared to the one that I was experiencing at home before then. There were all kinds of different people and ways that they lived and how their home lives were like, and no one seemed to be feeling or having what I was having, and that was when I realized that what I was going through wasn't normal. Um, and after I realized that, that's when I really started harboring intense feelings of hatred towards my father. Um, Things were just getting much worse as well. I mean, like I said, it started out with touching, but I mean, with looking, but then it turned, and then it was always just constantly um, being being touched, and it wasn't right. And he always he always made me hate myself. Um, I hated my body. I hated him for making me hate myself, um, and I hated that I couldn't change it. Um, that same year, when I was 15, I did meet a boy in my math class, and he liked me. And as I got to know him, he was introducing me to a new movement I'd never heard of until he had mentioned it. I'd never heard of atheism, but it felt good to be told that my life was based on my own standards, that there was no God in heaven and there was no heaven or hell, um, that I didn't have to worry about doing what I wanted because there were no, air quote sins. Um, this is not to say that prior to meeting this guy, I had worried about sin. Um, I didn't even think about sin until that point. But um, I got to know lots of kids that year, and I was growing steadily as an atheist. Um, it was a lot easier to not be religious like my father. A lot of fake is how he'd be, um, pretending that he had a standard when he didn't. I went more to this deep end. Um, there was like a darkness that just seemed to surround my heart. Um, I became very negative. I I became very selfish. Um, I guess I guess this is when God reached out to me for the first time. Um, I remember I went to a public library that I would daily hang out with these bad kids, because it made me feel good to be with a bad crowd. I mean, I never drank, I never smoked or did drugs. It was just being a public nuisance with them and being negative to authority. We were walking back from, there was this local um, Cumberland Farms gas station nearby. And, we'd stop by there all the time and get drinks from there. And they're soft beverage drinks. And sometimes we'd separate to go off and do something and then meet back up somewhere else. Well, I had left my friends to go to the bathroom inside this library, the local library there. And when I came out from the bathroom stall, there was a woman that came out from the stall beside me. I was washing my hands when she was looking at me funny. And she noticed I was glancing in her direction. That's when she started talking to me about Jesus Christ. And I just want to pause here just to mention that until this moment, I hadn't really heard of Jesus, like not even once, except when he was mocked on television, with TV shows like Family Guy and everything. And I was really disassociated from the name. I had zero understanding of Jesus Christ or anything about him. I had no idea what Jesus had done for me. I didn't care. As she told me things, I could barely understand anything or even hear what she was saying. In my mind, I was just thinking, oh my goodness, this lady is a religious nut. She's a religious nut, and she's talking to me, and this is hilarious, and I've just got to tell my friends. Um, and I fought hard to keep from laughing, and I just waited for her to finish, and just wise in my own conceit, thinking that I know better. I pretended to be nice to her, and I smiled. I even smiled at her. She handed me a tract, which I didn't even look at, not even once. And as soon as I said thank you, I just like took off. I just like ran out of the bathroom. And as I was walking outside to meet up with my friends, I was just laughing to myself. And I'll never forget this because it was the worst thing I ever did. I uh, I just ripped it up. It was just my heart was just so dark. Um, my brother with the disease, he was very very ill in 2009. He was sleeping in a hospital bed in our living room most of the days. He was no longer going to school. He had visiting nurses come to clean him and administer morphine to him to ease his pain. He was just dying, and it was really, really, really hard to watch. I mean, his body was skeletal, like a concentration camp survivor. He had trouble breathing. His feet were curled inward towards the other. He had scoliosis, with most of his body leaning to one side, and it was just crushing his organs. Um, just daily pain, and this made it. It made it difficult for him to eat. The one major thing I can say that I learned about his life was just the practice of service to another person. I mean, all his life it was just my siblings or me and my parents who took care of him. Um, I did many things only nurses ever did. It was a very humbling experience um, because you couldn't do this with pride. Um, when the nurses came regularly towards the end there, we only picked up the slack when they came until they came the next day. Um, he's a very lovable kid, very lighthearted, very bright, very just not many people like him. He's very honest. It was hard. He died October 25th of 2009, and he was only 17. I was hard on myself the most when he died because I wasn't there for him. My father was. And it made me extremely angry that a man that I knew didn't love me and his hateful wife, they were there for the person I loved the most. Um, and then I have memories too of the time that I was grieving. During the time I grieved and cried over his death, my father wouldn't even let me alone for that. Um, I was never allowed time to be alone to grieve. Every time I was crying or anything, like he would just say things to make me feel like it's natural and I should just just accept it and move on. And I just did not feel like I had I was allowed to properly grieve. Um, I mean I well, anyway, after that, I just planned my life out like a map. I made decisions I was just gonna do as soon as I turned 18. I was determined to just do it all, and I was going to take off, and I was gonna never see my father again. I mean, it was all about me after my brother died. I mean, I had no one left that I could care about. Um, and when that was like the last one, that's when I met um, a Christian man that God worked through who changed my entire life. Um, I mean, he was already of age at the time, and obviously I wasn't yet. I met him through a friend I knew. We got to know each other, and I told him, like I told all my close friends, what my father was doing to my sister and me. I mean, he was a wonderful friend. He never took advantage of me. He was respectful. Always listened during all my bursts of anger and times I would cry. I mean, he suggested I go to the police a lot of the time, but every time I told him I didn't have physical proof of what my father was doing. I mean, which was true, but I'll be honest, in reality, I was also scared. Mostly scared of embarrassment of what everyone would think of me if it ever got out to everyone in town. Stratford is a small town, and lots of people I know live here, and just having all the sordid details of the things I went to just spread out for everybody to see, with all the shame I felt for it. Um, I just didn't see it as an option at the time. On the day that my father uh, well, let me say first, God brought my sister and I from under all that abuse. Um, a lot of the time, I really relate to when God brought the Jews out from under the bondage of the Egyptians, because this is what a lot of what it was like. Most of the time, it was like you would think there's no way you're gonna get out of this. You know, that there's no way that like it was always gonna be like this. It would never change. Um, but it happened. My sister graduated high school. She had received what was called a Pell Grant to go to a local community college. Our stepmother was very much addicted to cigarettes, and she smoked almost 2 packs a day. I mean, she was always smoking. Whenever we got any money from anywhere, she always took it to buy more cigarettes. Um, and then this is when the day that I left, that's what happened. My sister and I were speaking about it privately with the door shut. And my sister was confiding in me how much she hated our stepmother, always stealing her money for college. And on the other side of the door, our stepmother was overhearing it. And then she went and told her father. Our stepmother was so angry, she just stormed out. My father was telling my sister he was tired of her, and he didn't care if his wife told her that she needed to leave her house. At that point, she was 18 and I was 16. I didn't know, but my father was raping my sister, whereas it wasn't happening to me. Um, she she told me that it had been going on for about a year. Um, I didn't know at this point that when he said he was tired of her, he meant that. Um, and that this would mean that he's going to turn to me next. And my sister told me later that she was scared of that. But at this point, because I didn't know at that point, my sister and I were just in our room, and we were beside ourselves of what to do that day. Um, and while I just sat there scared about my sister being kicked out, and it was just me to deal with our father alone. That's when there was a thought that just popped in my head. It was like this voice that was just like inside that said, like, it's time. That's all I could think of. That were the words that were in my head. Somehow I just knew that it was time for me and her to leave. And even now, I will always stand by this, that God was telling me that. Even though I was wicked and unsaved and everything, um, we packed bags of our own, putting up our personal information in it, and we snuck out of the house while our father was having a nap that day. And then my mind just instantly went to that Christian friend I had. I mean, out of all the friends I could have thought of, all I could think of was him. So I called him on the cell phone he had bought me in case of emergency, such as, I mean, he always would say to me that eventually it'd get worse, that eventually I may end up getting raped or whatever, but, I mean, I kept the phone so I could call him. He instantly came to get us. He didn't ask any questions, and we stayed with him a while. And it was during that time that my sister told me the truth of what her father had been doing to her. And that's when I told her the truth, and that's when we actually had a discussion about what was going on. We stayed with him for just a little while. And after a little while, he suggested to me and my sister that we should go live with his aunt in New Hampshire. It'd be easier for us and further away from all the mess in Connecticut. So me and her, my sister was the one that wanted to go originally. At this point in time, I just latched on to her. I was really terrified of dealing with life alone. So, I mean, what was I going to do? I had to go with her. I loved her, and I was too scared to make it on my own. he said it was perfect for him to leave because he hadn't seen his aunt, in a while, and he would come and go, um, when we did move up there, just making sure we were all right with his aunt, you know. But my sister didn't want to talk about her father ever since the day that, you know, we admitted to each other what he was doing. Um, she didn't want to face it, but I did. I was open with people I talked to, and I just grieved all the time. I cried all the time. I was angry all the time. I felt all the emotions that I was never allowed to feel, and um, it helped me to heal. And uh, this friend, he spoke to me briefly, um, about my feelings about God, and what exactly did I believe while I was up there. He didn't judge me or anything. Um, he just listened, and he didn't attack me for anything I believed. But he did give me questions to consider and things to think about instead, such as God's involvement in creation and everything. I was still determined that I was always going to be an atheist, and I never let it bother me with anything he believed. He just never shoved at me, and I just didn't press him for information about it. He would pray quietly to himself a lot, um, when he didn't think I was watching. Uh, he wore a cross around his neck, which I know now that it's not any good to do that. But I mean, he just believed in this Jesus, and I was just so curious. I just didn't understand, why did he do this stuff? Why was he so interested? I just needed to know, what is so significant about Jesus. Um, when I was 17, so this is the next year after that, um, since I had left home, my father had called the police, to find me, and my sister had been using the social media Facebook, which is good. Facebook's good at giving nearby locations whenever you log in, so the police were able to find us by that. Um, Apparently, he was saying that we were missing, and he was telling police that he wanted me to go to juvenile hall, which is for delinquent teens, because I was disobedient to him. But I think the police knew more than they let on, because before we knew it, they wanted our testimony statements about what we went through, and they wanted quite rigorous detail. Um, they put us through the ringer to get as much detail as possible about him, but it was separate, so I still don't know all the specific details that my sister told them. Um, According to them, though, we didn't have enough to go to court about it, to do anything against him. It was just more of my word against, or our word, really, against his, and his against ours. Um, but my friend's aunt didn't want my father having control over me anymore. So she supplied a lawyer for us, and that helped my sister to win custody of me until I was 18. But and because of these things, they made me wonder more about God. I started to think that maybe Christianity wasn't as bad as I first believed. I just thought it wouldn't hurt to learn anything about what it meant to be a Christian. I started looking around on YouTube, from those people. I mean, I know now they're false converts, but at that time, I listened to everything they said. I found myself digging into a group, like a truther movement, is I guess what you would call it. They're people that call themselves Christians, and they speak all the time about Illuminati and all that stuff. I started liking the sound of being called a Christian. That I would believe in something that rarely anyone else believed. It was like I knew something no one else did. It if I'm being honest, I could tell that in my heart it felt like I was like more holy somehow or special. I still didn't have an understanding of Jesus Christ or exactly what he did. I had no understanding that I was even a sinner and that I was on my way to hell. I just started calling myself Christian. We moved back down to Connecticut when I was 18, mostly because I wanted to go home and find my old friends, but they were all gone when I got back. They'd all gone off to college while I'd been gone, and I realized they all forgot about me. The following year, when I was 19, the friend and we got close, and he took a personal interest in me that no one had since that kid that I knew that taught me atheism in my math class. I was still unsure of myself. It was difficult to open up to being affectionate to somebody else because all that I'd known was just abuse. Being affectionate with people, it was as if it was just connected with abuse to me, and so it felt wrong to be affectionate. We did take things slowly in that direction, and one night I ended up sitting with him. Uh, I'm not happy about it. I'm not proud of that. But it meant a lot to him, and he wasn't interested in being with anyone else. We basically just like engaged ourselves together, and we kind of did it under God that we would be a witness of a promise of engagement to each other. But me being a lost sinner, I guess I didn't really take that moment seriously. I started working, and I was meeting lots of new adults. At the time, it was a wonderful experience for me, and I loved all the attention I got, especially from other men. It felt like as long as I had their looks of approval, that I was loved somehow. I know it sounds confusing, but that's how I thought. I had bought myself a nice smartphone. I was collecting phone numbers. It didn't stop at just people I physically met. I was meeting men online. During this time, I was calling myself a Christian, and I just saw myself righteous in my own eyes. Foolish. I knew that the feelings towards these other men were wrong, but it felt fun to me. It was like I had a secret. I could flirt and enjoy their company, but as long as my fiance didn't see or hear of it, it didn't matter. I never slept with anyone or anything like that. I didn't. It was just a purely emotional connection to them. I knew it was wrong what I was doing. But as long as my husband didn't know, because he didn't see or hear it, it was okay. It was fun until he found out. We had a fight, and I cried a lot. He forgave me, and we moved on. And I just told myself I wouldn't do it again. I would just make sure I wouldn't. I was still in my self-righteousness. There was a certain guy at my workplace, in particular, I was drawn to. And I don't even know why. There were those dangerous feelings from the first guy that was just coming right up. And I fought them. I fought them as much as I could. But eventually I gave into it. I was using Facebook again, and I had him on that. I was posting pictures of myself just to get attention from him. It was really addicting to have that kind of attention. All I ever craved was attention. I made myself believe that I cared about him because I was under the impression that a Christian was supposed to be super caring about people. Um, they're not supposed to be rejecting of anybody or judgmental. They're just supposed to love everybody. I hid everything as much as possible, but my fiance at the time, he found out anyway. And it crushed him. And he forgave me again. And I told myself I wouldn't do it again. Just like before. But this time it was a little different because he didn't trust me anymore. And I was confused. I decided I was going to move in with a coworker, and I need time separated from my fiance to think about my feelings. It was an awful environment I put myself into, though, because my coworker did drugs. And I didn't, but it was vexing to see it. I contacted that guy that I was working with because I wanted to pursue those feelings. But when I met him, I realized that all he wanted from me was fornication. I was broken because I thought he was someone that cared for me. It really hurt. And when he wasn't there for me and no one else was, I realized I was alone. No one that I knew was around me, and I was just lost. I was scared I was scared for not recognizing myself. It was like an out-of-body experience. I was just watching myself do horrible things, like a horror movie. And then that same familiar voice that had told me to leave with my sister that long ago was once again in my head, and it just kept on telling me to go back to him. And I called my fiance almost immediately, who had been waiting for me to come back. He came and picked me up, and he told me that he was surprised I wanted to come back. He said that he told God that he was going to leave the next day if I didn't come back. It says Brother Brian from the channel Husky 394 XP says there's no such thing as a coincidence. And at that point, I then vowed with myself for a third time that I was done playing around and I was going to make things right. But that still wasn't what God was looking for. I still hadn't turned toward him or repented. The coworker that I was messing around with, he was just texting me over and over again. And at first I tried to ignore him in my self-righteousness, and I just fell back to texting him anyway. Falling back into the same boat. I just couldn't change myself. And that's when I messed up. My husband wanted to leave me. He was finalized. He was determined to leave me. There was nothing I could have possibly done to make him stay. I saw how wretched I was. The whole time I thought I could manage what I did, how I was, my need to be given attention. That's when I knew I couldn't stop. He went to the bathroom to get ready to leave. And I was finally broken. I was finally at the end of myself. I just knelt down on the floor and I prayed. And I was just crying. I cried the whole time, and I was just crying out to God. I started pleading that He would help me deal with my problem. I pleaded that He wouldn't take my fiance from me. I was just asking for mercy and asking Him to just not take him from me, and that I was sorry. I wanted to be changed. I wanted to be clean. Because I felt so filthy. I was tired of having a record of constantly going back and forth in my self-righteousness. And when I felt forgiven, is when my fiance came back into the room when I was praying. And I didn't even see him standing there. I'm sorry. I just finished talking. And I turned around. And he was just standing there. But it was the look in his eyes. And I just felt a flicker of hope. And he said to me how I needed help from God. And I was sick in my ways. And he was just right. I was sick. Jesus says he came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. That they that are whole need not a physician, but they that are sick. I knew I couldn't stop, and I knew I needed help. So that's when the desire for truth happened. I was looking for anything that would help me find the right way. I was going back through the list of people I was subscribed to, and one of them was subscribed to a channel called Husky through 94XB. It was Brother Brian's 9-part video about the Bible version issue, and about how the King James Bible is God's true inspired word, and how it came to be. And it was just at the end where he had a salvation message, and I was blown away by that message. And I was just absorbing everything I heard. It was just a moment of clarity, and I knew there was truth in those words. And I just believed the King James Bible was the right one. I just knew. And I've been changed ever since Jesus Christ has come into my life. The Holy Spirit has just changed so much. And it's changed me so much. It's like the person I was in my past life just died. I look back at that life and I can't imagine being any other way. I can't imagine being that. The way I am now is the best I've ever been, because I stopped relying on my self-righteousness. Such, with the God be merciful, a sinner. God be merciful to me, a sinner. Yeah. God was merciful to me. I've been saved for about 2 years now. Salvation near the end of May 2015 to maybe the beginning of June 2015. I can't exactly pinpoint. It's been a giant sanctification process. A lot of things have been changing. I dress very conservatively in the manner of not showing much, not to be drawing attention to myself. I don't wear jewelry anymore. I don't look for approval by other men. I just get closer and closer to God. My relationship just gets closer. I look back at my life and it just makes me cry. Not only because I just realized how filthy it was, but that God was with me every step of the way. That 5-year-old that I was, kneeling beside my bed late at night, just talking to God. I believe God tries to reach everyone at different points in their lives, but they reject it so many times as an adult. I think that's when God gives me over to reprobate mind. Just thinking about how God knew me and just was working in my life even before salvation, that's just incredible. I really hope my life story and testimony of salvation is a blessing to someone. Thank you for listening. God bless.